Hi there. It's great to be here. I've heard the conference has been going fabulously, so I'm happy to be here today. So the clip we're going to show, I think it's about 15 minutes. And it starts by looking at kind of a little bit historically how the Christian right strategized to work with the black church to defeat pro-gay legislation. So that's where it starts, and then it goes in a little bit to the organizing that is happening around, that was happening in the 2012 election in Maryland, the marriage equality campaign. And the film, just generally, it looks at that campaign and the activists who were working on that campaign and how they passed it, and also how personally they were dealing with these issues around LGBT issues and equality in the black community and the black church. And I look forward to talking afterwards.
Maryland is going to play out in a way that will hopefully correct the wrongs of California, but that's yet to be seen. The reality is that the far right, as well as the African-American leadership that they've been able to amass, is going to do what they do. They've been doing it all over the country. And they go in the pulpit and they use the pulpit as a space of hate to undermine people's rights.
The strategy of the right has always been a strategy of fear. Not only produce fear, but to use it skillfully to get people of color to cross over and become a part of the radical right. It has happened to us over and over and over again.
Cincinnati City Council voted 7-2 to pass what was called the Human Rights Ordinance. The purpose of this ordinance was to elevate one's sexual preference to protected class status, but many local citizens were outraged, including Phil Burris, president of Citizens for Community Values.
The Human Rights Ordinance that was passed in November of 1992 basically said that you cannot discriminate based on housing or jobs. It just mirrored what the 1964 Civil Rights Act did. We drafted legislation that would change the city charter that said you cannot pass any laws based on sexual orientation. We had to collect signatures to put it on the ballot, so obviously those were circulated into churches, and it was amazing the support we got from the African American community. Even Fred Shuttlesworth, he was considered one of the big three, and he lived here in Cincinnati, and he wanted to help us.
He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. His home and family were bombed twice.
I know quite a few things about fighting discrimination. Cincinnati Issue 3 is not about discrimination.
This was probably the high watermark for the African American community and the evangelical white community to work together on an issue. The biggest tool we had was KZ Smith.
Last November, the voters came out and 62% asked to repeal our Human Rights Ordinance.
And that 62% against an ordinance which would have specifically protected homosexuals was voted significantly so by the black community. Is that not so?
What black people need to understand is that gays are trying to become the new minority. And if blacks don't wake up, they'll be back on the back of the bus again.
It was trying, to me in my mind, trying to legitimize the gay lifestyle. I was the president of the Baptist Ministers Conference at the time. A group of people had come to me asking if I would be the spokesperson for it. What troubles me is that people can't believe that we actually stood up for what we believe. They think that we were motivated by the religious right, that we were motivated by rich white people coming into the community and telling us what to believe and what to stand up for, versus us thinking for ourselves and believing for ourselves. I believed that homosexuality was wrong before I met a Phil Burris or anybody else.
We knew that if we could get the message out that the African Americans were offended by this, not me, not the white folk. It was too easy to pigeonhole us and saying we're just hate mongers. But when an African American got up and delivered the message, they didn't touch them. They didn't say a word about them. They were afraid of them.
That's the reason why we got sexual immorality. That's the reason why there's a rise in the gay agenda. You can be converted. You were not born that way.
The black church to this day remains fundamentally conservative. You know, we preach against smoking and drinking and drugging and even movies. The gay thing is something black church has not quite been able to grapple with. We think it's a white man's disease, that it was contagious and it got on us, you know. Well, I was already a part of the evangelical fundamentalist Pentecostal movement for generations. I stayed in those trenches almost until I was 50 years old.
I'm in a miracle mood. I'm in a healing mood.
I knew that white people were using their influence to buy my influence with the black church to advance their anti-gay agenda. And we bought into it.
Our nation is grateful.
There are a few prominent leaders who have a voice in the media, who have been influenced and embraced by non-black fundamentalist entities, funded, encouraged, given positions of leadership and prominence in the political and religious circles, and they're made into voices of influence.
We may face an America in 10 years where the problems that are in the black community are in every community in the land. We don't want an America like that. We helped bring together black, white, and Hispanic groups that already agreed in principle with each other. So we just went into various cities and connected major players with each other, got them talking the same language, and then released them to do their work.
Americans remain committed to the historic definition of marriage as a union between one man and one woman. That hasn't stopped a handful of unelected, unaccountable judges from trying to force their counterfeit version of marriage on the nation.
Look at this, I look at a big task. I know the Prince George's County like the back of my hand. Baltimore City, we're in just about every day. The black community is the Southern Central region, which is all, you know, Baltimore City on down. Wife and kids are absolutely supportive of all of this. I mean, they believe in it, they understand it. We have a lot of dialogue, we've had questions. I mean, they ask me, say, well, Dad, why don't you just let it go? And I mean, or, you know, people should live the way they should, right? I said, well, think about it. So I try and challenge them to think. You know, if you're going to be the person that gets a news clip and thinks of 2 to 3 minutes about this and says, oh, equality sounds fair, I guess I'll do it. Great. Your mind's going to be changed. But if you think past that 5 or 10 minutes and start looking about the society at large and look at many other factors, you might have a different thought process on it.
Baltimore County.
22,000 Montgomery people signed this petition.
I said
20,000.
We are turning in over 162,435 signatures.
Now same-sex marriage is going to be put to vote here in Maryland. The Maryland Marriage Alliance announced it submitted more than twice the number needed to take this issue to referendum.
Both supporters and the opposition recognize the powerful voting bloc of the African American community, and they use African American spokespeople.
Because what we are seeing is that countless thousands of Marylanders around the state want to see marriage go on the ballot, but they also want to see it defined and upheld between one man and one woman.
Sometimes don't fall next to the tree, baby.
Focus on developing constituent youth, people of faith.
Maryland's ballot initiative in regards to marriage equality is going to require a lot of education. It's going to require a lot of outreach within the black community.
One of the questions in 2004 when Georgia was trying to pass this amendment, and we completely lost it. It was embarrassing, really. I did hear that from a lot of black gay people who felt that marriage was not their number one priority. And it kind of stopped me, like, you know, what are you not understanding what we need to do. So we do need to have a message out there again to people who don't understand why they can't get married or why they should get married, and to understand those 1,000 rights that we get deprived.
But you can't argue with them because they'll go straight into economics, education,
health,
employment, and health. And those things to them, and their argument is those are more important to me than you telling me I have to go tell this white man that we are interested in getting married. When people say those things, that it's not a black issue, we have to stop them from saying that maybe it's not your issue, but as a community it is our issue, because there are lots of people in our community who want to engage in gay marriage.
I agree with both of you. The one thing I would say about that is that riding the bus in Montgomery in 1955 could not have been everyone's top issue either.
That's true.
But they understood the bigger issue in the macrocosm, that the Montgomery bus boycott was just the mechanism for trying to achieve equal rights. It was one. It wasn't the only one, certainly wasn't the most important issue, but it was the issue that carried the day.
So before you guys head out, does anybody else have any questions? Who's the first timer?
You're kidding.
Right. Yeah! That's right. This is gonna be really fun, guys. I know you've never done this before. It's gonna be a lot of fun. You are identifying supporters. You are getting people to vote for this bill. So we know that if we don't reach out to these people, who's gonna reach out to these people? No, opposition. So it's important that we let them know what's going on and how to vote. I wanted to just talk about clipboard control. You wanna keep your clipboard to your side, and you wanna keep at least a foot space between you and the person. You don't want the person to open the door and you're right here. Yeah. It's not very welcoming. So I want everybody to just take a deep breath. And yeah, let's get riled up. It's gonna be a great day, right guys? Yeah! Let's go! That's what's up, man. It's a righteous man over here.
Okay, are you registered to vote? Okay.
How old are you?
21.
21?
All right.
You gotta get registered to vote. We gotta get you registered to vote.
I ain't voting on my gay shit though. Why?
Okay, why? What's up?
I ain't get that. Right, Joe.
That's not cool.
What made you be gay?
Alright, that's what's up. That's
Right,
what's up.
so what made you be straight? What made you be
That
straight?
made you be straight.
That just came off of this
Same
mic.
thing.
You can't answer that question, but
I used to not have the same rights as you, but I know that because a black man like yourself stood up for a woman like me, I know that I got the same opportunities. So you as a black man have the opportunity to stand up for somebody else. Whether you're gay or not, these are your brothers and sisters out here, and they need you to represent.
Who's you to tell somebody who they can't have sex with, who they can't be with? They ain't got that power.
Right.
Nobody has that power to say you can't marry that young lady. Who has that power? Nobody.
But you know what? Our state has put the power in your hands, and so what we need you to do is vote for. You gonna vote for 6.
I got you.
Okay? Vote
It's gonna
for
be the
6.
sixth thing. And all right, do y'all need community service hours? You do? All right, y'all can always volunteer with us and get community service hours. Y'all want to do that? We feed you. We bring you pizza.
Prince George's County will be probably one of the most important counties because it's such a centralized location of black people. It is the wealthiest, predominantly black county in the entire country. It's a really, really nice part of Maryland that people just don't see too much of. I mean, this is the black suburbs. We are the only state where a ballot initiative has been posed thus far, where black people can make a significant impact on the outcome of the election. It's mostly Democratic, however, it's very socially conservative. I mean, we have a very, very large and very politically active church community here. And there will certainly be a lot of campaign efforts to reach out and to polarize this community around the issue of marriage equality.
on, honk your horn if you believe.
No same-sex marriage in the state of Maryland.
Sitting right there for us to make sure we win on November 6th.
What is afternoon? It's so dark. I was like to say good evening. I'm sorry. That was powerful, Yoruba. Yeah, powerful. Okay, so we're going to talk afterwards, so I won't speak long. My name is Aishah Shahidah Simmons, and I'm the producer, writer, director of the documentary No, the Rape documentary. And we're going to look at a clip that the title of the chapter is, I think it's Men, Clergy, and Community Accountability. So first and foremost, and I'm a survivor of incest and rape, I always say that because so many of us cannot say it, and it's important. The shame should never be on us who've experienced the horror, but on the perpetrators. And with that said, we're going to hear two testimonies from survivors. So I just think it's really important just to let everyone in this room, as well as the viewing room, to know that, because we just need to be aware. I look at No all the time. It doesn't have an impact on me, but there are still films that I can see that can trigger me. And also, I just want to, so we'll hear two testimonies. We'll also hear about the role of that men must take in ending gender-based violence, as well as we'll see clips from clergy, and Islamic clergy, as well as African American clergy, those who have said very disparaging commentary about sexual violence, and then those who are very clear about the role of religion in terms of that, how women and men have used religion to heal, and just the role that clergy must take in terms of taking a stand against violence against women. And let me also, I'm sorry. No looks at heterosexual rape in the African American community. Rape happens everywhere, all the time, all communities. LGBTQ people experience sexual violence. But let me just say that No is looking at heterosexual rape. I just want to be clear. So I look forward to the dialogue afterwards. Thank you.
Talk most about today is the experience that happened to me when I was in my early 20s. And it was the summer of 1992, and it involved someone who was an avowed pro-feminist man who I did anti-racist work with. So it cut even deeper for me that someone I thought I had a trust and affinity with would victimize me. And so it was someone that I knew too. And so I think there's shame factors involved for me still today that I feel like did I say something? Is there something I might have done that would have given him an impression that I was interested? Although he did know at the time I was going through my coming out process and had talked to him about feeling like I wasn't straight. And he was very sympathetic and empathetic around what kind of issues I was dealing with then. And in fact, so much so that he was going to end up being my roommate with another man who also worked with me doing anti-racist work. I felt safe. I felt very safe with him. And during the time that I was living with him is when he perpetrated against me. And the other intensity to it is that we were both graduate students and at a place that was fairly to mostly hostile to people of color. So there was this notion in my mind that as much as I knew that what he had done to me was not okay and was a trauma, that I still had to team with him in some way to be able to survive the rigors of graduate school, to survive the struggles that I had on a daily basis with feeling like I didn't belong there because I was a woman of color. It wasn't until a year after the assault that I actually disclosed to someone, and actually I disclosed to my first female partner that I had been assaulted. The time came where I just couldn't hold it in anymore. Also, with that came me needing to get psychiatric attention. I was actually admitted into the psych emergency services of University of Michigan Hospital and was there for a while trying to regroup. So when I disclosed to my partner who the perpetrator was, it was really amazing because I had overwhelming support from her. She was actually the one who talked to my perpetrator. He didn't deny it, but he never acknowledged what had happened. I stayed in my kind of section of campus hoping not to see him, and I think he did the same thing. At one point, he wrote me a letter, and I still have that letter. And he said he was sorry for what he had done, that he realized that what he had done was wrong, and that he was sorry that he hurt me. He never wrote that he had raped me, that he had violated me, but he did acknowledge that there had been a victimization, there had been something that wasn't okay in our relationship.
Me on that night with John, that black naval cadet, after that party, I was 17. He pulled off my panties, held down my arms, and said, "Don't worry, baby, I'll be gentle." Me on all those nights with Dexter, my boyfriend of 2 years, I was 19, 20. He beat me and beat me and beat me, then pulled off my panties, held down my arms, and said, "Hold still, bitch, if you want me to be gentle." I should have known enough not to be alone with a grown black man. And if I was crying and whispering, "Stop," and if I was crying and whispering, "Stop," and if I was crying and whispering, "Stop, stop, 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 stop it, stop it, stop it, please," he kissed me afterwards, so he couldn't have raped me.
One of the men who was very supportive of me, who also was very close to my perpetrator, who did anti-racism work. He's a black man. I do think he's pro-feminist. When I disclosed to him what had happened, when he found out, his response was exactly what I would want black men to do in terms of responding to other black men who are known to be perpetrators or alleged perpetrators. He didn't distance himself and say, "Well, I'm just going to shut you out because I'm not like you. You're a bad man and I'm a good man." He continued to talk with this man, not in a way that was, "Let me condone what you did," but that was, "Look, I know what you did. What are you doing to make amends for what you've done? You need to seek counseling. You need to do things that are going to change your behavior, because if you do this with this woman, you'll do this with other women." And I think what was powerful too, and one of the things that he was able to do is, I think, even say, to this man, "I've learned the behaviors also, It could have been me. It wasn't me. But at the same time, I'm not going to just walk away from you because you did this. I'm going to challenge you to do something, because you have to change. You must change." And so he was constantly kind of checking in with this man as much as he could about what he was doing to rehabilitate himself. I think his sense was that he needed recovery as much as I needed recovery and healing.
That is not just enough to be a principled person with women, but you have an obligation to challenge the behavior of your peers.
How do we begin to develop in a way that she does not have to be responsible for his receiving consequences for what he's done? Because what we know, after all, is that if there are no consequences for me, I will continue to do what I'm doing.
I was 20 years old in 1983, and I was a senior in college. One of the highest ranking black male officials at the university where I attended decided to take an interest in me. Why don't I go to Africa with him and serve as his research assistant during the summer? He decided that one weekend I should come to his apartment and he would tutor me in Creole. So he picked me up and I went to his apartment. Then he kissed me. "I don't think we should be doing this." I said, he said, "No, relax." All of a sudden I started to panic. I was in his home. I didn't know exactly where I was, and I was just praying. I said, I hope he doesn't do what I think he's gonna do. And he did. He started removing my clothes, my underwear, and I was like, "Please." He said, "No, you just need to relax." So I just froze, and I just know that I just tried to go some other place in my head. He raped me. How am I gonna get out of here? thought this was some kind of joke. I mean, he just laughed and said, "Oh, I tell you," he said, "you act like these silly little white girls who complain of rape and bring their rape charges to my office," because he was over student services, believe it or not. I remember getting my bags and just not looking back. And then I collapsed. I called my friend who was also a black administrator, and he said, "Don't tell anyone." He's the highest ranking black professional at the university. And I felt that with him being so powerful and me just being a student, him calling me silly and all of that, maybe other people would call me silly too. So I decided to be quiet because I felt people would not believe me. And I just never talked about it again for 10 years. But in 1993, during the Mike Tyson's appeals trial, after he had already been proven guilty in a court of law, and when I heard radio talk shows and black people talking about how Desiree Washington was a fool and what was she doing there any place, it just dug up all of that for me again, because I felt like that's what they would say about me. What was I doing at his place? You know, why was I there? And I can understand how someone could get in that situation. I consider myself a very intelligent and responsible person, but I grew up learning how to trust men.
Until communities say violence against women will not be tolerated here, yes. There's zero tolerance, and you will be held accountable, we will not do it. That's right. So imagine if all of us thought that it was unthinkable to assault women, what might happen if the judge thought that, if the pastor thought that. So these are individuals, for example, who we often refer to as reality definers, that they have the power to shape norm.
You bringing a hawk in a chicken yard and wonder why the chicken got eaten up. You bring Mike to a beauty contest, and all these fine foxes just parading in front of Mike. Mike's eyes begin to dance like a hungry man looking at a Wendy's beef burger or something. She said, "No, Mike, no." I mean, how many times, sisters, have you said no and you mean yes all the time? Wait, I'm talking to women now. We're gonna talk now. See, the day of the BS is all over. You're not dealing with a man that don't know you. And the damn deceitful games that you play.
This notion that my passions, my sense of my immediate gratification somehow or another supersedes all of your rights as a human being. I mean, it's just, I mean, really, it's just ludicrous. I mean.
Imagine the strength of that man. You know, heavyweight champion. Nobody wanted to talk about that. It was what was she doing in his room?
Why wouldn't she go up to the room? So a lot of these girls said, well, she knew better, she knew. Oh, so what are you saying, that Mike is only capable of thinking through his penis, that is normal for a woman to come up and for a man to have his way with her? I mean, this makes sense to you? This makes sense to us? And here we are, all these black women thinking that she's wrong because she enticed him.
Well, I had so many arguments with men over it because they were of the position that because Desiree, or what I think that was her name, came to his hotel room, that was an invitation for her to be raped. And that it was a stupid decision for her to go to his hotel room. Well, I agree. It was a stupid decision to go to the hotel room, but the problem is rape has never been really a punishment for stupidity. Because if it was, a whole lot of men need to be bending over, because I know a lot of stupid men.
A man can go out with a woman, can spend all his money, can indeed she can promise to give it to him. They can go to a room, house, apartment, hotel, whatever, and take a shower together and start playing around together and start actually doing it. She never loses her right to say no, even in the act.
This guy raped her. Who could fight Mike Tyson? Grown men who are trained to fight can't beat this man up. But you want Desiree Washington to somehow have been beaten up.
I just came here to
pray that the jury, after all evidence is in, they would decide on the evidence of the case and not on race. Because both of them belong to us. And we must love both of them. We cannot destroy anybody to build up another body.
Unfortunately, many leaders of black communities, who are often clergy, stand with black males, even black males who have committed, and even in some cases, as in the case of Tyson, have been convicted of raping black women. And it is a tremendous betrayal, in fact, of black women. It is a betrayal of black women who have been raped. It is a way of saying that their experience doesn't matter. And in churches, it is a way of saying that black women should sacrifice themselves, sacrifice their needs, sacrifice their dignity to the black community, to the black man.
In Islam, which certainly both in the countries of its origin and in the way it's being practiced amongst African Americans here in America or the United States, we are finding women pushed to the background again and not having a role. And I think that this sanctions sexual oppression of women, abuse of women. And I'm very alarmed as a Muslim myself about this, because when I read the tracts and pamphlets and things that you find in the black community coming from an Islamic perspective, they play up the one verse in the Quran that gives men the permission to beat their wives. And this is being really promoted in our communities, and it's causing a lot of consternation on my part that this is going to increase domestic violence amongst Muslim people, black people in this country.
Those ministers rallying around our brother Mike, praying for our brother Mike who had violated this girl. Nobody said a prayer for Desiree Washington.
There's still a strongly held belief that women provoke the violence. And so there's an example. If we think that women provoke the violence, the assault that they experience, then there we go. The community is not going to respond. Hey, they provoke it, so they deserve what they get.
She's raped by Mike Tyson. And then she exposes this rape. My question is, why would that make her a traitor? The traitor is to have a rapist in our community and not warn anybody.
It's also important to emphasize how very subtle things, or seemingly subtle things, contribute to a climate that creates an environment where women are much more easily raped. Things like gangster rap, stereotypes about black women create this hostile environment where women's lives, black women's lives, are not respected. And if you're going around, for instance, calling black women names or putting black women down, it's easy to make the next leap to disrespect this black woman.
You judge a woman by the length of her skirts, by the way she walks, talks, looks, and acts. By the color of her skin, you judge, and will call her bitch, black bitch, if she doesn't answer your, hey baby, what you gonna say to a man? You judge a woman by the job she holds, by the number of children she's had, by the number of digits on her check, by the many men she may have lain with, and wonder what jive, Murphy, you'll run on her this time. You tell a woman, every poetic love line your narrow mind can think of. Then, like the desperate needle of a strung-out junkie, you plunge into her veins, travel wildly through her blood, confuse her mind, make her hate, and be cold to the men to come, destroying the thread of calm she held. You judge a woman by impressions you think you've made. Ask and she gives, take without asking, beat on her and she'll obey. Throw her name up and down the streets like some loose whistle, knowing her neighbors will talk. Her friends will chew her name, her family's blood will run loose like a broken creek. And when you're gone, a woman is left healing her wounds alone. But we, so-called men, we so-called brothers, wonder why it's so hard to love our women when we're about loving them the way America loves us.
Those are two powerful pieces of work. My work isn't finished, so I'm feeling really insecure right now. Wilhemena's War follows a family in South Carolina that has 6 family members living with the HIV virus. They're not all gay. They're not all drug users. They did something very human. They had sex. Ain't nobody in here got here without somebody having sex. So the story follows South Carolina being a Bible Belt state, follows sort of a systemic analysis of what's going on in that state, which is representative of really 11 of the states that have refused to adopt the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicaid. 60% of people living with HIV in the United States rely on Medicaid for their health benefits. Wilhemena and her family are one of them. You're going to see 3 excerpts. This is like 3 short clips because, as I said, the whole piece isn't done yet. The first will introduce you to Wilhemena and her daughter, Daishal, who's at the time of this interview 15. She was born HIV positive. Her mother was a drug user who did not get prenatal care, and she was born 2 years prior to when they discovered that antiretroviral viruses would actually cure the AIDS virus. And she's right at the point now where she's trying to figure out how do you negotiate. Living as an HIV child is one thing, but becoming a teenager and trying to figure out how do you negotiate sexuality as a teenager living with HIV is a whole other order of thing. We also meet an activist named Vivian Clark Armstead, who works with one of the HIV advocacy organizations in South Carolina as she tries to go to pastors in the community. You know, one of the differences between African Americans and the American at large is we're more community oriented. So we police ourselves through the community, the pastors, you know, the thought leaders in our community. So she's talking to a pastor about the realities of HIV versus what he thinks is HIV. You know, it's like that it's the gay white man's disease and somehow just jumped over to our side of the fence. Then the last sequence is Daishal's mother, who is dying from HIV, and sort of gives you a sense of what is going on in the South.
We first met Mrs. Dixon and her family in 2009. Her granddaughter, Daishal, had written an article about having been born HIV positive.
If it wasn't for the Lord and my grandma, I don't know what I would do in this lifetime. I know I can make it if Matt Johnson did. Me and my grandma went to North Carolina to see him, and he said we could make it. Just take our medicines like he do.
Yeah. So you gonna drink it or you wanna just take it?
By 2009, most HIV patients in the United States were on a 1-pill-a-day regimen.
All right.
Daishal took 24 pills a day.
My name is Daishelle Dix. I had HIV for 15 years, all my life. My stomach and stuff be hurting. Now I throw up, my legs, they give out on me and they be swollen sometimes. So that's why I stay in the bed. And my throat and stuff be hurting. Then I be back and forth to the bathroom and stuff. So I be in a lot of pain. Sometimes I'm just alone to myself. Sometimes my friends call me, I don't answer the phone. I don't go out the door for like 2 or 3 weeks. When I'm around different people, I feel like I'm being treated different. I'm just a person with a disease. Treat me just like everybody else be treated. Thank you.
People's gonna always be people. And when I go talk to people or talk to somebody else with HIV, seem like they've been scorned so bad in life, I was listening but learning how to protect Daisha from it.
I call Mina mother because she raised me. My mama, Tony, I don't feel comfortable calling her mother since she never did nothing for me.
We put up with a lot of Tony. Tony was Tony, you know. I let them know this is my daughter, Tony. She's on drugs, she's HIV. It's up to you if you want to deal with her, and it's up to you if you don't want to deal with her. But me, I got to love in spite of.
This sleepy country town lies 30 minutes due east of Aiken, 90 minutes south of Columbia, and 2.5 hours from Charleston. Those who are lucky work at Dixie Narco, making vending machine parts, or at Daco, building transmissions. The highlight of their day is an after-work pool game.
HIV, you don't hear too much about that around here, because if people got it, they're not going to tell you about it.
Well, my youngest son has AIDS, but he lives in Columbia, not here. I didn't like it, and I didn't want it around me. Because every time he comes down, he wants to bring his boyfriend with him, and I don't want him around me.
There's no public transportation. Public health clinics have one doctor serving as many as 3,000 patients. Many hospitals have closed. For those like Wilhemena and Daishelle, the problem is reaching any kind of health care at all.
Daishelle see her doctor every 2 months. She goes to Columbia. That has been a burden on us because when gas got so high, we didn't have the money to get gas to go into Columbia. And a lot of times the car be broke or something like that. But I just have to make sure I get her to Columbia. It's just hard sometimes.
Like one time, I had went up there with my aunt and they wouldn't let the doctor see me because I was with a different person. But then they ain't give us no gas voucher. We hardly made it back home. We had asked somebody for like $5 or $10 so we can get gas because we thought they was gonna give us our gas voucher.
Few in South Carolina seem to understand that there's a silent epidemic in their midst, not even the governor. Bamberg has one of the highest rates of HIV in the state.
The 116th governor of the state of South Carolina, Governor Nikki Haley.
Governor Nikki Haley, a Tea Party favorite, grew up there, a half-hour's drive from Wilhemena Dixon's home in Williston.
I love small towns. You have to understand that I'm growing up in Bamberg. You see the farmland and you see everything else. That's how I grew up. So there is a fondness for me whenever I look and see a small community like that because that's home. And it's where people take care of people. And they, status doesn't matter. It's all about making sure that if you see a stranger on the street that looks like they need help, you just stop and help them.
Nikki Haley gained national prominence as an opponent of President Obama's health care reform.
South Carolina is not like any other state in the country. The issues that drive us on health care is not that we don't have good quality health care, it's that we have unemployment and poverty.
The whole area of health care in South Carolina is fraught with want and deprivation. We've never had the kind of access to health care for poor people and working people in the state that others take for granted. Rural South Carolina is dying on the vine. Farming has failed. There's no industry. We have a county here, for example, Bamberg, that lost its hospital. There's not one doctor in the whole county. So we're literally seeing people dying because they can't get access to ordinary care.
Activist Vivian Clark Armstead needs to drive more than an hour to reach her destination.
Well, South Carolina change is slow. Like I said, there was a small scrimmage. It was called the Civil War. They lost. News has not reached here yet of that defeat. The church is the cornerstone of our community.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
You know, and if pastor doesn't say it, it ain't so.
Right.
But when it comes to HIV, one of the biggest fights that we have when we come out into rural areas is stigma.
Oh, sure.
You know,
sure.
So we really need to engage the church to get to the congregation. We need to save their lives so you can save their souls.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
so it's a twofold partnership.
There was just so much fear attached. If I were to go into other churches and say, hey, I want to talk about HIV and AIDS, oh, no, you don't. And that's just the way it is. And honestly, you might get that reaction from some of our people here.
People are hiding because they're uninformed. And Bamberg has some of the highest rates of HIV in this state.
Yep.
So there are people sitting in those pews that haven't found a venue in which they can go to get information.
Sure.
And that's why I bought this when it talks about our state. Our state is #1 in the nation in heterosexual transmission of HIV. So when people, they go straight to the gay story. It's not the gay story.
Yeah, it's not.
It is not. We are #1 in the country in heterosexual contact.
It's in isolated little towns like this, towns you drive through on the way to someplace else, that the vast majority of new AIDS cases are occurring. But federal funds find their way here only sporadically.
That we stop acting as if HIV and AIDS is not impacting women. This is not a racial issue. This is a women's issue.
2 hours northeast of Wilhemena's hometown, a federally funded mobile testing van, the only one in South Carolina, is setting up.
I usually set up in the entrance where you're coming in.
My sister died from the virus in 1996. And so I'm compelled to do something, you know, that no one else has to go through what my sister went through. The way that she died, in shame and hiding and fear of people finding out when they're in the battle for their life.
AIDS has become the #1 killer of Southern black women in their childbearing years.
So you and your husband are still together? Okay, so no cheating or anything?
Not with me.
Okay. Your wedding ring, baby, it's not a condom. Especially if you ain't got that dick with you 24/7 and you don't carry it in your pocket. You don't know where it's been.
Their risk is starting to catch up with the risk of women in third world nations and sub-Saharan Africa, where the main risk factor is being married.
When we next caught up with Wilhemena, she was picking peas for gas money so that she could visit her daughter Tony, who was by now in hospice care. Mina had wanted to care for Tony herself during her dying days, but it wasn't to be.
Tony, she was so sick, but she got out to the road, she got her strength back, and she caught a ride. And she went downtown to the supermarket and she fell. But everybody at the supermarket I shopped at, they know me and they know my family. They helped her to get to the hospital. So we wasn't there to pick her up when they said she was to come home. They sent her to the nursing home.
Laurel Bay Nursing Home had been cited repeatedly by the federal government for substandard care.
They said she told her that she wanted to go there, and I told them she was incompetent to take, that we was making decisions for her, and that I had a plan for her, that she was very sick and everything. But they just took and put her in the nursing home and started just starving her to death, letting her fall all the time, and we were constantly trying to get her out, and it was like we had to go through almost a big legal battle just to get her back.
Laurel Bay's doctors took Toni off her AIDS medications altogether. It took her 3.5 months to die.
Look at Toni over Toni. Look at there. How you feeling, girl? Oh, look at her, Mama. Hey, Toni.
She's smiling.
Hey, Toni. Mama here, Daisha here, and Harry here.
Toni had never signed a living will, and Mina thought that since the state paid her to take care of her daughter, she didn't need one.
Well, she always was a fighter.
These people here made sure she give it up, though.
These home video images reminded me of the bad old days of AIDS in the 80s, but it was 30 years later, in July 2011.
And Father, in her last days, I didn't know her needs. They took her away from me. I wanted to be the one to take care of her until the end, Father. I had told her these things over and over, even when she rebelled against me. She knew I was there. Please, God, save my soul. Bless me.
You think because you have to look a certain way, or because you're from the projects, or because you're making less than $20,000 a year, that that's what happens to those people. That's South Carolina's attitude. Those people got what they deserved.
Hey. Hi, my name's Elegance, Bratton. My film Pier Kids Life is what you're going to see next. And the clip that you're going to see deals with the world that is Christopher Street and the Pier, and particularly the types of individuals that you will meet there and situations that you may be caught up in. And ultimately my film is an immersive nonfiction film. The goal is to make everybody, while they watch it, into a Pier kid. So I can't wait to talk to you about it.
This whole village is another world inside a world. Yeah. Because I tell you no lie, this is its own.
This is the hood. For me, this is another hood.
This is not a hood, because this is like a virtual reality. You never know this is here until you actually come here and live it yourself. Yeah. Everything in here is amazing. It's like a story. Like you read it and you're like, this is just, I can't believe this shit. This is a fairy tale. People, boys, hustling. Never thought about it.
Can I use your lighter, please? Thank you.
What's your sign?
Take a picture of me. Take a picture of me.
Yeah, it's a new day.
You got a cigarette?
I'm all out.
It's a new day.
I gave him all the way.
Hey, yo, y'all still taking pictures? Take a break. Come smoke with us. You're not embracing?
Yeah, that's right.
Follow Pier. Elegance and Pier.
It's pink body rockers on the OVO. Then this the pop out on the realest deal. The best league of teams are the deals is ill. It's like OPI in a Ferguson suit. Apparel I'm dominating every avenue. Cobblestone could use a barrel too. Got a page of the entourage travel too. Look like I'm flying high. Ain't got time to talk, just high and vibe.
Many of us who are homeless or that are currently homeless, it's a system
it really is a system. People think like, oh, these children are walking up and down, back and forth. The piers are where we socialize. This is our like living room in a sense, you understand? You know, we come out here, we have fun, we meet new people, we explore ourselves as well as relationships, you know, those that last and those that only last for an hour. And I mean, it's really the humor and also like the unifying effects of the pier versus what Christopher Street itself is. It's more of, you know, this is what I need. You know, we going, sometimes you have to go in there and you have to steal some food from CVS, you understand? Because at the end of the day, our bodies need nourishment for eating. Or that's a panhandling sense, you know. You go walk up and down, Christopher, about 5 or 6 times, and you know, you ask somebody from something as simple as a quarter or $1, it adds up. It allows us to get a meal. You understand?
Black people.
Somebody else.
We had 3 gunpoint robberies happening right over here, especially. Really want you infant child to be here for that?
He was here for the whole time. He was here the whole time.
It's 3 in the morning.
It's like 30 of us.
Right, ain't nobody gonna touch him. I'm out here.
Gonna touch my son.
It might be time to take the infant child home.
Take him on, boy. This is our job. I'm telling you. All right, y'all have to be a parent. Don't get in my face. This is your job. Stop. Don't get in my face. Calm down.
I got something to say. I got something to say. The only concern, right, is for the baby. But he want to put on his nightstick. That's a bullshit.
You got that right. You got that right. Thank you. She came to my face, right? Thank you.
Record that, nigga.
Make sure you get that. German, please. Check this out. Shut up and listen.
What you need to do?
Shut up. Shut the fuck up.
What are they? Wait, you're doing too much.
I'm doing too much. You did too much when you stepped in front of the officer. You went like that.
I told because she was about to get hit. She was about to get hit.
That's
exactly. That's why I got me.
Look at me. I'm not fucking out here on my fucking somewhere else. Am I out here? Brother, am I out here on my somewhere else? I'm a U.S. Marshal. You think they gonna swing on me in here?
Yes, they will.
You think they swing on me in here? No, they wasn't. They was gonna hit this one. No.
Never mind for the gay bashing, but the police is the trouble. I'm more scared of the police than I am of the people in New York, and I'm from Chicago. I'm more scared of the police.
Why? Why are you scared of the police?
Because I don't. Who want to get patted down and dropped on the floor and left there, just to be patted down for no reason to find nothing? You don't find no drugs or nothing.
But you still
leave
get
me on the
patted
floor. I'm still being patted down. I was told to put my hands on the wall. My pockets were empty. I had to take off my shoes. I had to unzip my flyer, my pants flyer right here. I had to unzip this. I had to do this. And open this up and show them that there wasn't no drugs in there. I had to take my shoes off. I had to take my socks off. I had to keep my hands on the wall.
Where were you when it happened?
I was right. I don't know the streets like that, but this street right here where this light is, right here. These walk this bridge,
Yes.
go right here to the
I know what
street
you're talking
after
about.
Christopher.
Yeah.
Right there.
Hey, what's up with y'all, man? Whoever is interested, I got business to sell. Yeah, he can stop by and I can, you know, it's gonna take 2 minutes for me to explain it.
Oh, what's good, Elegance? What's up, man? How you feeling, man? Good to see you.
Oh, so you know Elegance?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What's up with you, man? What's up with you? How old are you? 23. You look like you're 18, bro. How old are you? You too? 19. Alright, I hire porno stars, gentlemen.
What's your rate?
Puppy Thugs, Dog Pound USA.
What is it you're not trying to do specifically? What did he ask you to do?
Porno, all that. You know, it's basically like, hey, it was good. I mean, it just draw people in. It's not like $500. They pay like $150 or whatever. It's just a whole bunch of bullshit.
What was, if you don't mind me asking, what made you do it in the first place?
I mean, in the first place, it was like, it was fresh to me, like, you know what I'm saying? The whole life, just, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
When I got in there and I didn't have no knowledge, it was because somebody else was pushing me.
Hey, how are ya? What's your name, dear?
Baby.
Baby? Why they call you baby, baby?
Because I'm old. I just got the baby face.
You got the baby? How old are you?
How old do I think I look?
To me, you look anywhere from like 19.
35.
Wow.
Fuck out. That's how they call me baby.
Hi.
Hi, this is Trina. That's Trina.
Hi, Trina.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, girl. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I can't complain.
Where you from, Trina?
I'm originally from Harlem, but I live in the Bronx.
Okay.
Thank you.
What brings you out here tonight?
Just chilling, you know. There's a lot of things going on in the community, so I wanted just to come out and have a good time.
This is where the beauty, where the ugly, the drama, this is where everything takes place. This is our home. Like, people say, how you can call this your home? Because everything that happens here, that people who don't have a roof to call a home, everything that happens in a, you know, a home, a house, a family, it happens here as well. You know, you have the beautiful moments, you have the bad moments, you know, you have the moments where you make up with that girlfriend that, you know, y'all knew y'all was wrong, so y'all have the ability to sit here and say, I'm sorry, and this is what this means to me, and I can trust you, you know what I mean? Like, this is really a family in itself, because although many people come here on different levels in life, we all can convert to the same place that some of us used to be. And in that theory, you know, where we used to be, all serve some type of common, you know, struggle. But some people are still struggling. And it's us that come out here and be able to say that and be able to, you know, move in that sense of being accomplished that makes that next person want to do the same.
My name is Tyreek Casper Jones. A lot of people know me as Casper. 25 years old. Born in St. Luke's Women's Hospital before it came to Roosevelt. From Brooklyn. Started coming to the Pier around the age of 18. It's been alright. Let's talk facts. It's fucking stupid out there. That's all.
So first I want to take the opportunity to thank the other artists. It's amazing to be able to share the space with you guys. Amazing work, so thank you guys. All right, so my name is Amir Dixon. I'm the writer, producer, and director of Friend of Essex. The name of the film is in honor of Essex Hemphill, whose work, whose activism, whose writing really has shaped who I am today. The film, Friend of Essex, is about young black gay men looking at our relationship to the black community, looking at our relationship to the mainstream LGBTQ community, and looking at how we see ourselves and how we navigate that. In 2011, the CDC released a report that HIV among young black gay men was up almost 49%. I remember going to meetings and being in spaces with predominantly white folks, and we were statistics and numbers, and I realized that I needed to do my job of going out, traveling, and capturing the stories of other young black gay men to put a face and a name to these statistics and these numbers. So this is just a clip, and I really do look forward to chatting with folks after. Thank you, guys.
I knew I was different. I didn't have a name for it, nor could I label it. I couldn't define it, but I just knew it. The first time I was called a batiman, a faggot, a sissy. I can recall asking my older cousin what it meant and being told, gay. Could this define the feeling that I felt when I was around the other boys? If so, I knew I didn't want it if it came with the feeling like this. 15 was the first time that I heard my pastor speak of the abomination, the sin, the wrath of God on the basis of homosexuality. I look back to the first time I was called a faggot. Now hearing my pastor speak depth to these feelings I felt on the inside, I wanted nothing to do with these feelings. I wondered if the same God that could save the masses and feed the poor and heal the sick could save me from this. This feeling that I now could name, I could label. I prayed, I begged, I pleaded with God to take this from me, to deliver me.
Experience with the Black church is an abusive relationship. So I think the earliest memories I have about my introduction to the Black church was that it was something that we did every Sunday. The church got me at a very vulnerable place. I had very low self-esteem. Like I was looking for an affirmation that somebody can tell me what my purpose was. And that's what the church initially gave me. It was like the honeymoon phase. My brother eventually became a minister. Every time I turn around, he was talking about the rapture, get your life right before Jesus come back. And so it struck a fear in me that I never, ever admitted to. I felt myself overcompensating for what I was experiencing with my sexuality and that internal conflict. Within this period of time of me being born again, having that experience and being involved in the church, I got an exorcism from my mom. The next person was my brother. He also gave me an exorcism. I had accepted completely that it was not God's will for anybody to be attracted to the same sex, to love the same sex in an intimate way, to be in a relationship with them. It was all about God taking away my desire, the thought, my attraction completely to men. After the first time I fasted 3 days straight and was praying and reading the word, it still wasn't gone. It was 2 episodes that I remember in which I put a knife to my wrist, and I felt like it was much easier to commit suicide than to have to live another day struggling.
The overall view in the church in general is the view that gay people should be seen and not heard.
The Black church has, and is beginning to fail us as a community.
It's almost as if to say that we can accept your dollars, we can accept your gifts, but who you are as a person doesn't matter.
We think that God is talking about homosexuality as we know it, but homosexuality as a concept was created in the 19th century.
We play the role of choir director, play the role of hooking up, first ladies' outfits and clothes, and those are great. Like those roles are great. There's nothing to say against them, but I think we also can have other roles.
Our job as human beings on this earth is to use our personality and to use our gifts to uncover the glory of God in the world. And I think that is what the Black church should be about. Instead, I feel as if we're sending many of our young gay people into a psychological whirlwind of self-doubt and self-loathing and self-hate.
Dear white Jesus, humbly I stand before you. Nothing between us but contempt, hate, and hopelessness. Dear white Jesus, I did all that you asked of me. I killed and I ravaged my village, my community, my town, my state. I turned on my people in your name. I spoke your message of condemnation against my people in your name as you asked of me. Dear white Jesus, now I need you. I need to see you. Why do you continuously turn on me? here I am, in chains, burdened and enslaved to your word that was given to me. Dear white Jesus, do you hear me? Do you recognize my voice? I have nothing. I have given everything to you in hopes of drawing closer to you, of the possibility of hearing your voice. Let me see you. Let me touch you. Dear white Jesus, here I stand humbly before you, with nothing between us but contempt, hate, and hopelessness.
I don't know what it is, but every time I see the bitch I flip. Somebody must have told her bogus sick. Somebody need to tell her that she need to quit. I don't know what you've been told, but every time you spin, bitch, you lose control. And every time you dip, girl, you break your back. That ain't cut, you're supposed to be soft with that. I wanna see a bitch let it all out. Bring it back on a count of 3. 1 for the ready, 2 for the set. DJ, drop the beat. I don't know what it is, but every time I see the bitch I flip. Somebody must have told her bogus sick. Somebody need to tell her that she need to quit. I don't know what it is, but every time I see the bitch I flip. Somebody must have told her bogus sick. Somebody need to tell her that she need to quit.
Yeah, Super DJ Mike D production.
Let it all out. I wanna see a bitch let it all out. Bring it back on a count of 3. I wanna see a bitch let it all out. I wanna see a bitch let it all out. I wanna see a bitch let it all out. Bring it back on a count of 3. 1 for the ready, 2 for the set. DJ, drop the beat. Let it all out. 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 Bitch, let it all out. 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 Bitch, let it all out.
I believe that we have failed young black gay men. I think there's so much lack of empowerment and strengthening the black gay community, especially men, because we already feel that they're devalued or less of a man for being gay and being black because it's so shunned. And let's say in schools, the sexual health education is not inclusive of the LGBTQ community. It's not comprehensive. I didn't know how to protect myself. I didn't know what I was doing. But if it was with a woman, I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew it to grab a condom and X, Y, and Z. So when I had sex with a guy for the first time, I didn't stress the fact of using condoms. And because of that, I contracted HIV my first time having sex, which could have been 100% preventable had it would have been discussed in schools, had it would have been discussed at home, had it would have been discussed openly to just say that we don't care what you do, but if you're going to do X, Y, and Z, no matter what your sexual orientation is, here is how you can protect yourself.
We have to wear a mask. I don't think it's a question is if we do. I think that we've been forced into a position to where the mask is no choice.
Mask, 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 mask. This is my mask wherever I go. It hides my hurt and my shame. It hides my scars and the blames of a broken, fucked up childhood. It hides my history of broken relationships and my battle scars that accompany them. Battle scars given to me by other young, black, gay beings that are broken and lonely as I am. This is my armor. It holds me tight at night. It silences the voices of my fears and slays the demons that find a home in my being. This is my armor that protects me from you. This armor has become me. I'm now cold, hopeless, and void. This is what I call home.
My mask is put on to look more like a straight dude. Do I realize it? Do I accept it and know that it's probably not the best mask, quote unquote? to wear, yeah, but it works. And it's not that I'm being fake or weird, it's just something that I have learned and got accustomed to do because it's what works.
I think some of us do wear masks to fit into the larger white community only because we haven't found acceptance in our own communities.
People have said to me, being a black person is much easier than being a, out person.
Because again, when you have oppressed groups, the concentration becomes liberation and freedom and breaking those chains, right? And sometimes people in our community feel like they need to reach freedom at the expense of other people in their community.
When my brother fell, I picked up his weapons and never once questioned whether I could carry the weight and the grief, the responsibility that he shouldered. I never questioned whether I could aim or be precise as he. I only knew he could have fallen. And the passing ceremonies marking his death did not stop the war. When my brother fell, I picked up his weapons. I didn't question whether I could aim or be precise as he. A needle and a thread were not among his things.
At least in my experience, it's very prevalent for us to start doing drug use and partying to hide everything that we've had to deal with. I know, just in my experience with escorting, I at my very core knew that was not the right thing to do. I knew that it did not feel right to put a price on my body. It did not feel right to promote myself as a sexual object. It's really difficult. It's really difficult to be looked at as, like I said, you're already black, you're already gay, you're already a male, but then you're gonna die of some horrible disease just because you decide to have sex with something that you're naturally attracted to. And if you don't die from some horrible disease, then you can cut out the gay part, but then you have to also look at the black part, because then you're looked at, criminally for being, because you have too many tattoos, so you can't get jobs, or you did fraud to try to get what everybody else, what you think everybody else has, so then you have that on your record, then you can't get a job. And I mean, it's just so many other issues. And then what's really sad is, aside from all of this, I know I'm acquainted with very closely, felons and HIV positive people and escorts and drug users. And I'm not talking about just coke and weed, I'm talking about meth and heroin. And I'm acquainted with all these people, but their biggest issue is, if I'm positive, I'm gonna die. If I'm negative, I will be positive.
Let me just start by saying, I think we all, for those of us who hadn't had the chance to see any of these films, had an opportunity to see just some powerful storytelling coming from our community. And we know that we have stories to tell. We've never lacked stories to tell. We've not always had access to resources and platforms in order to tell those stories. And so I'll start at once by, paying small tribute to a figure like Ellis Hazlip, who 40 years ago founded a television show on PBS, WNET here in New York City called Soul. He didn't have to tell the audience that he was an out black man. Those who knew Mr. Hazlip knew that he was. And of course, he was fearless in the conversations that he was willing to have. I think about seeing Louis Farrakhan in Aishah's film, and Hazlip sitting down with Louis Farrakhan on public television in 1970, 1971, and challenging him on his homophobia, to give you some example. And he really represents this idea of independent black media. When you started your film, Aishah, and I've been with you for a part of this ride, there was no Kickstarter. There was no crowdfunding. You know, it was glad handing and being on the lecture circuit and all those things. Talk about some of the struggles that you had, you know, being able to tell this story the way that you wanted to tell it.
Okay. First, I just want to, because I was trying to be mindful of the time. I just want to do, I mean, everybody's been doing it, but I just have to do shout out to Yosef and Laura and Jennifer Lee. And I'm sure all of us can attest. I really just want to, just really as a filmmaker, commend this vision of including film. Usually films are at night, after dinner, optional film festival, optional screening, and so to have this
halfway across town.
Exactly, and to have these screenings and this discussion as one of the sessions, a part of the conference, is very powerful, and I think we need to recognize, and more conferences need to do that, because film is cultural work, it's activism, and so it needs to be a part of it. So I started working on No in 1994 when I was 25, and it was, I don't even think email was barely work. It was like, it was like going to conferences with papers and flyers, and Dion Hayward, we were just talking about when we first met, which was around that time period. And I was at a conference with some flyers. I'm making this film called No. And one of the major challenges, I was young then, I was young, I was 25, and was that funders didn't want to touch it, and they used my age, my sexual orientation, I'm a lesbian, as a reason to not fund it. But it was really about not wanting to talk about sexual violence in African American communities. And so I would have statements such as, what's your axe to grind given that you're a lesbian? On grant rejection letters, like that was their concern, and I won't name because we are live streaming. If we weren't, I would name. A programmer at a major a cable network saying, where did you find all those smart black women? There's, and as a result, in concern that it wasn't realistic of the African American community. And then she said, I'm really concerned about stereotypes, that you'll be presenting black men as rapists. And so then I listed a whole long list of shows that I won't name because it'll identify the network. And I said, X, Y, and Z? And she was like, oh, yes. This was at a breakfast meeting, and she said, well, if we really keep pushing further, she said, you've caught me. She said, the reality is that most, we are a subscription network, and most people in Middle America don't care about the rape of black women. And so as a result of that, it was that it made me have to resort to other means to earn income for No, which was being accountable, being accountable to the community. Yeah. And I learned that from Tony K. Bambara. And so it's the community that you want to be accountable to. Mm-hmm. And so, and Mark, you were a part of that community, in terms of we were on, here at the Schomburg, at the Kevin Powell organizing Black Men in support of the film No. Just so many different variations of community being defined. And I have to say, hands down, that if it were not for the LGBTQ community, I'm not sure that No would exist. The Estrella Foundation was the first foundation they gave a grant to No, and it was, and I need to just say that it was, because when we say LGBT community, I mean definitely it was the multiracial LGBTQ community, but I also just really have to say it was, you know, it was the leading, the forefront of that were LGBTQ people of color. You know, I screened parts, you know, like just little clips and stuff like that, even at Black Nations, Queer Nations, you know, just all these kinds of spaces, and then globally with Arab women, Sub-Saharan Continental African women. So all of, you know, just helping me to raise the funds for No. And so I love Kickstarter and Indiegogo. I think it's great and hallelujah. At the same time, I'm really grateful for me in terms of my process with No, that didn't exist, because I literally was, I think about Oscar Michaud, you know, I was literally traveling from city to city with this work in progress, not only in this country, but globally. And so then that made me accountable to a global community. And I think that as a result, that No reflects that. Because when I first started working on No, I wasn't going to have Black men in the documentary. I saw it as like, no, this is, women have to speak about this. I wasn't going to even talk about religion at all, because I was like, what does that have to do with anything? And so that was as a result, and that vision expanding, it was as a result of my screening it and having folks kind of push back and stuff. And I have to have to do a shout out to two ancestral spirits, and I'll be quiet. Erinette White, who was the sister who was in the film, she I have a lot of her jewelry on. She died from a cerebral hemorrhage in August 2012, but she was one of the backbones of No. She was a scholar, activist, advisor. She was just one of the people who came on board at the very beginning. And I can't even imagine No, much less my life, without Erinette. So it's very surreal to see her on screen, because it was a cerebral hemorrhage. It happened like that. No one knew. We weren't prepared. She was gone. And then the other ancestral spirit would be Essex Hemphill, who I recognized what was going on. I filmed him in June 1995, and he transitioned in November 1995. And the power of editing, because he was very sick, that we had to keep, we had to just keep taking breaks and all of that. You would never know, because it looks seamless. But one of the things that I have to say is that he knew, we all knew the clock was ticking, and he was like, I need to be in this film. You know, he said, I want to take a stand publicly, and as he had been doing, but he was like, in this film around violence against women. So I just want to say Aishah to Erinette and to Essex.
Aishah, you recalled some of the response from some of the foundations, right? And there's a particular historical context to how foundations are responding to your film at that time. The way that the foundations responded to Marlon Riggs' Tongues Untied. And then suddenly the idea of Black sexuality, right, was something that these foundations didn't want to have to deal with. Marlon himself was on a clock, that was ticking. And in one of the things, of course, he leaves us is Black Ain't. And in some ways, all of your films are legacies of the work that he did with Black Ain't. But the thing that I remember about Black Ain't, it was in fact my introduction to Essex. So talk a little bit, Amir, about what it was to use him as this kind of focal point. And the title is interesting, right? Because, in the white gay community, right, there's that whole thing of being a friend of Dorothy, right, in relationship to Judy Garland and the character of the Cowardly Lion and the Wizard of Oz. And so we had to create new language. Right, to talk about family and community for ourselves.
So for myself, I remember when I was traveling for the film to shoot interviews for the film, I met an older Black gay man in DC that shared his story of knowing Essex and having his work, and they had photos together. And I remember him telling me when he was younger, they would identify each other. You would ask another gay person, are you a friend of Dorothy's? And that was a sort of play on the title, Friend of Essex. I can't really put into words what Essex Hemphill, Assad Saint, Marlon Riggs means to me. Growing up as a child, we were given, things, and we were supposed to admire Shakespeare, and we were supposed to admire all these other people. But I remember seeing the cover of Ceremonies for the first time, and just, I was in my mother's friend's home, and she had a copy. She was a queer Black woman. She had a copy of Ceremonies, and that was the first time that I saw two men in an embrace. And I was 17 at the time, and sort of trying to figure out my sexuality, trying to figure out who I am as a person. And I remember borrowing the book and reading it, and a lot of it at the time didn't make sense to me, so young. But as I've gotten older, I always revisit it. And I just remember when I was working on the film, and I started production on the film, you know, I really wanted to honor the people who made it possible for me to do and be who I am today as an artist. You know, I remember you made a comment about Black is, Black ain't. I always think about watching that film and looking at Marlon Riggs, whose body is literally deteriorating, and at the end he's in his hospital bed and he says he has to get this done and he has to do this. And I always think about that, you know, because I know that when we walk into a room as artists, we're walking in with Audre Lorde, we're walking in with Marlon Riggs, we're walking in with those people. And for me, to answer your question, sorry, Essex Hemphill, as his work, his activism, he as an educator really laid the foundation for my artistry. When I read his work, when I see videos of him speaking, when I saw that clip, I'm reminded that I can do this and I'm called to do it. And I wanted to give that back to my community, who a lot of other young Black gay men coming out don't know about Essex Hemphill or don't know about Marlon Riggs. And I think that it is our job to amplify those voices and to keep that legacy going. So that was sort of what I aimed to do.
I know Marlon was ambivalent, and he talks about this in the film, talking with his producers about how much he wanted to show of his body deteriorating. But as viewers, it forced us to have to grapple with how this disease was impacting our community and could impact an individual's body. If you talk in the popular culture and public sphere in 2014, you know, AIDS is now a disease, HIV is now a disease that folks have transcended. It's not an issue. Your choice, June, to tell this story again, to force us to grapple, you know, with a family that's dealing with these realities, and more importantly, to connect it to public policy issues that we don't think, you know, have any impact on our lives. You know, whatever you want to say about Obamacare, right? You know, this is an attempt to really connect real political organizational efforts to things that are ravaging our communities. So talk a little bit about why, you know, you really felt compelled to tell this story at this time.
Well, let's see. Back in 2010, the president announced a national HIV/AIDS strategy, and the initial public relations videos that were done for this showed only gay white men. And I had two thoughts. I was like, where are the gay Black men? Where are the straight Black men? And where are the Black women of any stripe, you know? And I had already begun filming with Wilhemena and her family, and at that point I was actually thinking about making an entirely different film, sort of on the lines of a famous Maysles Brothers film called Lalee's Kin. That's about poverty in Mississippi. But Mina sort of became an advocate herself because she was being forced to be an advocate for her daughter. She's a poor, uneducated Black woman living in the backwoods of South Carolina. And people don't want to hear this story. And she's so isolated that she didn't actually herself understand the forces around her that were creating her situation. She got it in a gut level way, like, you know, she would say things like, hey, they took all the jobs from us. There ain't no jobs out here. And, you know, and at one point there was money for her to homeschool her granddaughter, and then that money disappeared. But she didn't, you know, it was about making that connection, because so often there's sort of a trope in the narrative about, you know, having a character that understands everything that is going on around them and is able to communicate it well to the to the audience. By the time you get down that road, you're already so far away from where the people are who are really facing this problem in the rural South. So it was necessary to sort of engage the story from two ends, so to speak, and I'm still working on bringing them together. But that was really the impetus for it, that I could begin to see how all of these forces were shaping her. I mean, she's Wilhemena, the grandmother, is the child of sharecroppers. She's picking peas for gas money. Yeah. This is still a reality, that legacy still comes in the presence. What was that James Baldwin's famous quote? The presence of the past. Do I have the wrong quote? I don't know, but we can. Yeah, the present is the past is so present in the present. Yeah. Well, that was
Jafari Allen had mentioned earlier in the day about the work of Kathy Cohen and the intervention that she makes with the Boundaries of Blackness, 1999, which made these issues explicitly connected to electoral politics and political organizing and a range of things. Yoruba, your film picks up on that energy to look at how we talk about these issues and the way the right has mobilized against it and the way that we need to push back around ballot issues and around building community and what have you. Your choice of the title of the film, boldly reappropriates what had been already the appropriation of blackness.
Very meta.
Right, for commercial reasons, right? So talk a little bit about, why titling the film that way.
Yes, I will. And I just have to say, before I answer that question, that Aishah, I don't know if you remember, I met you in 2000 for the first time at a conference when you were at one of those conferences on sexual violence in Santa Cruz. Oh my God. And I saw you talking about your film, promoting it, and it was an inspiration for me because that's when I was first getting into the industry and first getting into documentary film, and to see you out there, that you were doing this film, was totally inspiring. And I just wanted to mention that. So it's amazing to be on this panel many years later.
That was the Color of Violence.
The Color of Violence conference, exactly.
They're having their 15th anniversary next year.
Yep, and it's, just one thing about the media, especially, I think as African Americans and as African American women, seeing that you can go out there and tell these stories and figure out a way to do it. Has been inspiring to me, and it's still inspiring to younger folks that I talk with and mentor with. So I just wanted to say that. So The New Black, the title, I chose the title, yes, as a reappropriation of a reappropriation. It's a great way to put it. And I also chose it particularly for its provocative nature. There was that issue that came out in The Advocate, I believe, in 2005 that said gay is the new black. That pissed off a lot of people. And what I think we were seeing is this sort of pitting against the LGBT and the black community, and that's what inspired me. That's what, when I started getting interested in looking deeper into this issue and figuring and trying to see what was going on from a historical context, from our community context, and what people were doing in order to build a bridge of that divide, to bridge that divide and elevate Black LGBT issues in our community. And then the thing that's cool about documentaries, you start one way and then in the end it becomes something else. So really at the end of the film, I realized what the new black actually meant for me. And the new black, to me, is the new black conversation that we're having around sexuality. Like, this is the new black. I don't know if this conference would have happened, even 5 years ago. So it's the new black conversation, and it's also the black activists, young activists who are profiled in the film. They are the new black.
June's film deals with country living. Elegance, your film is dealing with life in the city. And when we think about Christopher Street, right, and I am a native New Yorker, though I haven't lived here in about 15 years. I can remember what Gansevoort Market looked like 15, 20 years ago. I can remember what Christopher Street looked like. There was a bar on Christopher Street called Ramrod. You know, so you know, it was marketed as a certain kind of space. That's not the space that it's marketed to as now, right? You got the sports complex. I mean, that's the place where folks are taking their families on Saturday afternoons and taking long walks and their long runs. And it's almost as if the kids that you talk about in this film are retaking over the space.
Wow, that's ambitious. I wouldn't go that far. I would say that they are, well, first off, we'll get into, well, I want to acknowledge the dead, the spirits, or I forgot what you said.
Ancestral spirits.
Ancestral spirits. I want to say that, basically, first off, Dr. Manning Marable and Institute of Research and Study of African Americans, without him, none of this would be happening. And it just blows my mind that what the man's vision has produced. Also, in my film, at the very end of the segment that you saw, you met Casper. And Casper Jushim Thorne, he was one of the first people I met while I was filming, and he passed 7 months into filming due to a double hit and run accident while he was on his way to go see his trans girlfriend. And it impacted me deeply because, you know, when you're making a film in like a city like New York, where like risk is a part of living in New York City. If you have a ton of money, if you have no money, you're always put in a situation where there's 10 million strangers, anything could happen. And when you go to the Pier, you know, these kids are right at the needle's eye of so much of preventable risk. And they're at the needle's eye because they're neglected by every meaningful institution that the city has to offer. So when Casper got killed on his skateboard going to see his girlfriend, that wasn't the way I expected. I hate to say it, but I had an expectation of a certain level of death, but I didn't expect it to be so innocent, so almost just adolescent the way that he passed. So Aishah, right? Aishah to those individuals. And as far as them reappropriating the space, the film is called Pier Kids in honor of Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. And in their role in igniting what we call a gay rights movement today in the late 60s. And these are two trans women of color, Sylvia being Latina, Marsha being black. And Marsha was Sylvia's gay mother. If you look through the records, I had some classes I took. I'm also a Columbia graduate, IRAAS 2013. Yeah, that's right. But you know, when I think about Sylvia and Marsha and the fact that Marsha is Sylvia's gay mother, Sylvia was a Pier kid, you know, and this goes back to 1969, right? This idea of queer people of color going to Christopher Street, going to the piers in order to eke out a space where there is no space, right? This notion of home. John O'Donohue, across the street at Union Theological, talks about this idea of home being the place where one is most deeply understood. And Christopher Street, for at least the entirety of the gay rights movement, and way before that too, has been a place where queer black bodies have gone to understand each other and to find meaning. So the notion of reappropriating space and taking it over, I think it's been our space for quite a long time. And what the youth in my film are, this is kind of like Custard's last stand, to go with the little war that the skirmish that your speaker spoke about. You know, this is the last stand. These youth are holding out a tradition and a legacy that far precedes them, and they are doing so under incredible, incredible pressures from above, within, and below.
We're here at this theater at a conference in which I would imagine virtually everyone in the audience has love for every one of you.
We hope so.
Look out for me on Kickstarter.
We're in a moment of broadband, you know, unlike Aishah's moment. So, you know, folks have been able to see, to the extent that they're available, clips of your films. We know that there are a whole bunch of folks who are never going to see these films.
That's not true.
I'm glad that you are an ambitious brother. but if, you know, putting on my more critic lens for a moment, what kind of work do you need for allies to do? You know, both in the political sense, but also allies of the work, folks who support the work. What kind of work do you need us to do to help the work reach larger audiences, right? And you know, and some of that is writing a check and doing the Kickstarter thing. But you know, I go back to like the moment a few weeks ago when the Times did the piece about Shonda Rhimes. And folks are all upset about how the New York Times did this and how the New York Times did that. And in the back of my head, it said, if we had a critical establishment, a critical intelligentsia that was doing that work already, it wouldn't matter what the New York Times was writing. But, you know, part of this is that, you know, where do we pick up the weight and carry the water to make sure that folks know about these films, know that these films are important, that these films can be put into a larger historical trajectory so that when folks are watching the films, they actually know who a Marlon Riggs is, right? That they know who an Orgy Lord is within that context. You know, what do you need from us, right, to go to that next level?
Can I, oh, sorry, were you gonna? I just want to say, just quickly, that I think there's a responsibility that we do have people in our community who have access to, you know, large audiences, who have funding, and, you know, I feel like in some ways, we tend to be the only community that doesn't support each other in terms of our work. I mean, you look at what Steven Spielberg has done, creating, you know, a whole archive and historical about the Holocaust. You know, where are our people who are creating that, who are allowing and giving us access to tell our stories? We are the only community that allows other people to tell our stories. I mean, I've been on this JAG for a long time now, so I'm very passionate about it. But I think that's one of the ways, and I know that's not necessarily, you know, Professor Mark Anthony Neal, but I think we need to, you know, somehow demand of our people who have the cultural, you know, access and money and networks that, you know, we have these important stories to tell, and, you know, we should be the ones telling it.
I remember when Aishah was finishing No, and I was fortunate to see it in very different kinds of stages. And for those folks who don't make film, right, you don't understand, okay, you just get a camera, you shoot some stuff, right? You know, you make a film. And so you don't understand the editing piece, but I remember you talking specifically about having to wait to get permission for some music and for images, and that stuff is a whole market unto itself. And folks don't understand those pieces of trying to get this work done. Elegance, you want to jump in?
Yeah. As far as like what y'all can do to help us and dozens of filmmakers like us all around the world, if not hundreds, right? The first thing I would say is an institutional thing. You know, luckily I'm no longer in this side of academia anymore, so I can speak a little more freely. Organizations that have taken up the reins of funding Black education and Black arts have done so in a way that is not particularly challenging to the status quo. And while I don't want to poo-poo anyone's who've gotten grants from those organizations and have made films, because many of the films that I love are as a result of those organizations, nonetheless, in 2014, if we add up HIV, if we add up the political, the way that our goals can be politically hijacked through religion, if we add up how difficult it is as a young person of color to be able to stake a claim to some sort of, you know, creative authenticity, let alone credibility, you know, it's on those of us who are in the crowd who support these movies to go to the institutions that are cutting the checks and demand a much more radical vision and a much more modern and contemporary vision of what Black art is. And then secondly, what I would say, if you want to support us, it's important that you reach out to your networks. I ran a really successful Kickstarter last winter, and the thing that made it successful was not me going out and doing TV. I mean, those things helped, but what really helped is every time I showed the movie, 3 people would walk out and put it on their Facebook and put it on their Twitter, and then those 3 people have continued to do that. We're entering an age now where the notion of, record labels or production companies signing deals with artists, it's not that way anymore. The way it's going to work is that artists will have to build relationships with their audiences, and their audiences are going to have to be as proactive as the artists are in supporting the work. So when you see filmmakers like us and you attach to someone in this panel, or all of us in this panel, follow us on social media and talk to your friends about us on social media. And this is a movement. The film business is what it is. There are plenty of wonderful Black stories being made, but they're not getting out there because people are not stamping their feet and, throwing Molotov cocktails in the theater to make sure that they get to see what they want to see. So, I appreciate this environment, and this is very great to have an opportunity to speak this way, but it's gonna take a lot of fire to get it done. And that fire has to come from, as much as it's coming from us, it's got to come from you.
And one of the things that you say, Elegance, that's important, language we hear in the academy, for instance, as to why they can't find a Black chemist or a Black biologist. There's no one in the pipeline, right? No one qualified in the pipeline. What we know about us in terms of artistic expression, there are plenty of folks in the pipeline, right? There's no problem finding folks. I mean, they're literally, right, folks who are out there doing this work all the time with very little recognition and no one knows about them. It really is about how do we connect these folks to particular audiences. Amir, you want to jump in?
So I just wanted to add, so there was a question asked around the sort of space, right? So I think we have to acknowledge, I think about the Schreiberg, and I think about Stephen Forward, who is archiving our work, right? So I want to definitely acknowledge that there are spaces.
Queering the archive.
Exactly. There are spaces like that. But I also think that for many of us, it may not be about giving money, it may not be about those things, but it's about how do we invest our time and our talents into the work, right? So I think whatever your talent is, whatever you can invest into the work, it's about supporting one another. But then on the third end of that, and my last piece, is as artists, we have a responsibility, artists and activists, to invest back into our own communities, right? So I think about how enraged I was when I heard about Toni Morrison giving her work to Princeton, I think it was. And I'm like, damn, where's Howard at? Like, why? So I'm thinking about things like that. It's like, how are we investing back into our community, and how are we, investing our time and our talents in giving our work back to our communities?
Our good friends here in Columbia, that's a different conference.
Yeah, that's a whole other conference.
Aishah.
Well, speaking of giving back, I just want to say that both Audre Lorde and Toni K. Bambar's papers are at Spelman College. So just want to... Two of my sheroes. There's something when you were asking, there's something again, and I bring up Toni a lot. I'm the reason. She's the reason I'm a filmmaker. She was my teacher and mentor during the last 5 years of her life in this form. But one of the things that she taught me was that a lot of, like for instance, NPR, PBS, a lot that came as a result of our struggles, like in terms of saying, demanding the air. So right. So we lost, so it's like, again, and I was talking about this earlier with my sister Walida, that we lose we win the battles and lose the war. So like, because now you would never think of NPR, PBS as being, multi-racial, cultural, in terms of, we think, at least in what I'm listening to on NPR, the stories, we can barely keep, news and notes telling me more, on and on and on. So I think that there's something about how do we not just like kick back after we've won the battle? How do we keep going forward? That is one thing. I think that, and I know that it's important to get films and stuff done and all that. I want to say that it took me 12 years to make No. And I'm not a traditional academic. I was not attached to a university, and there was many single digits in my bank account, many days with single digits, and I'm not, hey, a little, whatever. And I just want to share, so at the end, at the very when No was done, I got a big grant from the Ford Foundation, but No was done. So Ford funded, and I'm happy. Ford funded the subtitling of No and a study guide and a supplemental video, so it made No accessible in a global world in terms of French, Spanish, and Portuguese. I had the world premiere of No in February 2006 at the Pan-African Film Festival, and I received that grant in June of 2006, and it saved my life literally because I needed to have major surgery. But I share that to say several things that. No, in terms of, I didn't get Corporation of Public Broadcasting. I didn't get, and it's not that I didn't apply many times because it took 12 years. I didn't get HBO, Showtime, Lifetime, et cetera, et cetera. What I did get was $1 at times from an unemployed woman, €1 from an unemployed woman. And so then when No was finished, I was like, okay, Sundance, here we go. No Sundance, again, no national broadcast or whatever. And then I was depressed, right? So here I'm making this film as a survivor about sexual violence, and I felt like a failure because I didn't have those markers that society says is a success. And I had to fall back on Tony's words about the community, I'm accountable to the community. And so that No was screening at world premieres at Pan-African film festivals, at Women of Color film festivals, is screening across this country and globally. And for a film that has its world premiere in 2006, it is still, unfortunately, it's a commentary on the atrocity of rape. It is still relevant to this day. So I'm still traveling with the film, and I say that to just say that I think that. And I think it's important for creative filmmakers because I'm an activist who use the camera lens as my medium. I mean, it's not to say I'm not a filmmaker, but I'm an activist first and foremost. I say that to say that I think that we have to kind of think about long haul, and it's also about, when I think about this in terms of talking about gender-based violence, that a lot of times it's like, how can we end it? I may not be able to end it in my lifetime, but I'm thinking about how can I, ensure that maybe my niece's generation. So it's like, so then let's think about long haul, and let's think definitely in terms of our work, but also in terms of the community and the collectivity. Everybody can't be a film director. We need some distributors. We need some, promote. So everybody, it doesn't have to be an Aishah, Shahidah, Simmons film. How can I help you, Yoruba? How can I help you, June? So I think we also need to think about that, because I think about SKG, Spielberg and Geffen, and how they came together. Like, why can't, I think that there are ways that we need to think about collectives and coming together, and putting the egos at the door. We got to put them at the door, and to propel this image of collectivity. And I think that these are things that we need, models that we need to think about. And definitely I don't want to say we need to get paid. In a capitalist society, we do have to have income. I want to make that, but I don't, and I want everybody to live well. So for me, I want to dismantle capitalism. But so that's how I want people to live well. But just how do we live? How do we create? Yeah, exactly. Ashe. So how do we live in a space, right, where we can create work collective, where it's not about, let me get that first $1 million that I'll keep for myself, as opposed to maybe how can I distribute that first $1 million?
We're gonna open this up to the audience now. Miss Dr. McCoon.
Do we need mics?
We need microphones.
We need mics. I know.
There's one coming to them. Oh, okay, there it is. Down here.
And Jeffrey, we had this conversation last night about how, the first question.
Yes.
it's almost inevitably the crazy question, so we're not expecting that today.
I'm going to try very hard not to make it the crazy question, neither the solipsistic question either. I'm not trying to be a filmmaker, so I'm not even going to get in there. But I do appreciate so much of the work that each of you all are doing, because it's work that we have not seen in various forms, right? And there's ways in which the echoes of Riggs in the way that you present it, and echoes of Lord and other folks, we haven't seen. But my question is always a question about strategy, and I'm always interested in strategy of representation. And for me, I think that all of these films are equally complex around issues of representation, like populations that you're representing. And I'm just wondering what you do directorially in terms of strategically getting away from, let's say, for example, Wilhemena, not Wilhemena, but the Tina becoming HIV. Like she says she was like someone says she was HIV, right, in the film, or the Pier kids becoming dysfunctional queer black kids at the Pier, right, or even in your case, just thinking about or victims or the homophobic black people, right? How do you strategically work to make sure that the films don't necessarily indict the folks that you're representing?
I don't do that. I'm not interested in doing that. For me, it's about, you ask how do I do that? I showed up. Do you know what I'm saying? I showed up. And I kept showing up. And eventually, and you were saying you think of yourself as an activist who uses a camera. I think of myself more as like a rapper that uses a camera. Do you know what I'm saying? So my interest is to say, I trust what you're telling me about yourself. I don't have the right to necessarily, because like the pushback for your question is, all immediately in the back of my head is the politics of respectability, right? And I'm telling a story about gay life at a moment when gay marriage has been passed and like the American dream and full citizenship, that visibility as a citizenship is possible, and it only becomes possible through a certain type of conformity, right? To where you have to kind of mirror the straight, white, American Gothic type of thing in order to be credible as a queer body, and the people, like if you're 6'4" and you're born with a male body and you got big old shoulders and you put on a wig, do you know what I'm saying? There's only so much that individual can do to fit into that narrative. And where I meet that individual is in the very moment where, in the very place, that the blind spot in a colorblind society, if you will, where the inability to achieve that normalcy is just painfully clear. So, my film's about more than Casper and Deshawn's about Crystal as well, a trans black woman, and Anaya and Cheetah, who you saw. Cheetah is dying of AIDS right now, the one who was in the beginning, and they're not just dysfunctional to me. They're not only dysfunctional to me, but there are levels of dysfunction going on, and they'll tell you that about their own lives. And then what I'm doing is I'm interested in how do you fight through that? How do you find a way to make a way where there's no way possible, right? How do you, it's not necessarily about even overcoming the situation. It's about how does Crystal, how does Deshawn view their situation? And what are their judgments on that situation? And what are the strategies they apply? So I'm not interested in apologizing for them. I'm not interested in like trying to present them in some sort of way that makes them fit into like a super human narrative of like, if you broke in New York City, you might commit a crime to get by. That's real. And if you commit several crimes, you might end up in jail for the rest of your life. And if you have sex for money without a condom, you might get AIDS from a person who needs to pay you to have sex without a condom. Do you know what I mean? And I don't really view it as my place necessarily to neuter or to edit or to clip what they're saying according to the way that you asked your question.
I was just going to say, I think for me, the way that as a filmmaker, I'm interested in the complexity. And I always knew for this film that I wanted to have kind of both sides of the issue, because I think that it tells a more well-rounded story about what actually is happening. Because obviously everyone has their, as filmmakers, we have our point of view, and that's fine. But I was interested in digging underneath. So the trope of the homophobic black community, is, I knew that there was more than that there is more than that. And so but yet homophobia is part of our community. So that's kind of the lens that I took, and that informed, the questions that I asked, that informed the story that I followed as well. I think that as a filmmaker, just generally speaking, I'm not interested in demonizing anybody or telling anybody what to think. I'm interested in, you know, how can I show the experience of this person and as honestly and truthfully as I can. And if they are saying homophobic things to me as I'm interviewing them or racist things, you know, that's part of the story as well.
So I'm going to make this really short. Thank you for your question. I think it was a great question. For me, as an artist and as a filmmaker, especially in making this film, it was about, like he said, showing up, right? So for me, when I showed up, it was definitely about putting myself out there as well and sharing my own story and making sure that the people that I interviewed understood that they were not alone and that they were not just subjects that I was just recording. So in all the interviews, I sat the camera, I said, whenever you're ready to start shooting, we'll start shooting, but we're just gonna have a conversation. For me as an artist, it's important that I amplify the voices of the people that are part of my body of work, right? And it's about sharing the stories, because I feel a lot of people a lot of times feel alone and feel that I'm only dealing with this situation, you know? So it was important that other people heard their stories. That's why there were no, people didn't have name titles in the film, because for me, it was about you are that person as well, right? So that is what it was for me.
And for me, I'll say that it was very important, and I use the word survivor in terms of, so it was very important for that everyone, all of the survivors, and know the requirements were that we see your face, and that we had your full name. And again, it was recognizing so many people can't show their faces, can't give their full names. Honor that, you know. But for me, in terms of I wanted to convey the message that the shame is not on the victim perpetrators. I mean, on the victim survivors, not victim perpetrators, but the shame should be, you know, on the perpetrators. So I really wanted to convey that message, particularly because everyone in know, with the exception of one, they knew their rapists. They either had been, you know, boyfriends, comrades and leaders of revolutionary struggles, professors. And so I really wanted to just kind of say, this is Aaronette White, this is Janelle White, you know, that we see their faces and we hear their stories. So that was very critical.
Just to put a button on what everybody else has said, which I agree with, a lot of it comes down to the editing process, what happens when you're choosing those images and making sure that you've balanced it. I had a very wise mentor who said to me once, we're all human and you have to allow humans to have their ambiguity. And the more willing you are to allow them to have their ambiguity, the more they'll be believable as people. They're not believable when they're totally dysfunctional or when we engage in hagiography.
Right. And just one last thing too, I'm not someone that's from the church. I didn't grow up religiously, but my lens was the Black church, and I knew that I immediately got an advisor on my, my team who could look at cuts and give me feedback, the accountability. Who was a religious, Black religious scholar. So I think the accountability, the fact that you had men in your film as well, so it wasn't just, talking about anti-violence against women. So it's not just the, the rapist Black male. I think the accountability is important.
Wait for the mic.
No, because of the live stream.
He's like, no, I got it.
Live stream people won't hear you.
Oh.
I'm from the Baptist church.
I can shout.
Do I stand up? Is it on? Thank you for, it was just so great to see all these films and sit here and get the clips. Each one of them, I hope you are happy to hear that I was sad when it cut off. Because I was totally enthralled with your storytelling. And Amir, I really loved the artistic element.
Thank you.
In yours, it wasn't a straight didactic documentary style. I have questions about the process. I'm a music historian, and I just published a book on Bud Powell, and I'm about to drop my documentary on him in about 2 weeks. And remember, Aishah, we had a talk maybe about 5 years ago about making a film. So it happened, yeah. I'm in the house.
Can you speak outside? You can't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
right. And my question is this, about a very practical one about permissions. Okay, since I write music, I don't have to pay myself to put music in, into the film, the original score anyway. And then also about still photographs, when you incorporate other still photographs. I'm about to have a soft, premiere of it on my own social media. But when you start, at what point can you get your butt sued? When you're out showing your film, I need to know this before, so I'm not running from the popo.
You got to get permission.
Well, okay. You do have to get permission, but actually, you can get sued when you start making money is the short answer that somebody said up here. But since that rarely happens, you don't have to really worry about it. I just got a royalty check for $27.98. You can fair use things if you shoot them off of a screen of a computer. A little known secret. But if you,
so that's why people do that?
That's why people do that. If you then call them and ask them for the copy of it, then there's no fair usage. You gotta pay for it. So it depends. I don't know what it is you're trying to use, but if it's on YouTube or on somewhere where it's streaming on the internet, and you shoot it and it's clear that it's from a computer screen, then you can get away with not having to pay. Now that counts for most visual things, but not for music, which is its own devil in purgatory, which you will die before you ever fully understand, because there's, the performance rights and the who wrote it rights and the publishing rights, and it can drive you insane. My recommendation is you find somebody to compose your own damn music. Oh, okay.
He's gonna get all the money. That's
you're a musician, you're covered.
And just to add, because I did a lot of fair use, I did a lot of paying for footage as well. It's not even just making money though. As soon as you start at a festival, I mean, you could theoretically, if you didn't get permission and someone sees their photo that wasn't, that you didn't get permission, they could, have grounds to sue. And fair use, there's actually, and I could talk to you more about it afterwards, there's actually a lot of it, there's actually 4 criteria that you have to meet for fair use. And then you have to get it written, you have to justify how each of your pieces of footage meet that criteria, and then get a letter from a lawyer saying that they agree with this. There's a organization at Stanford that if you submit to them, this is what I did because my lawyer's like, it's gonna be very expensive for me to do this. I used a lot of footage. Organization at Stanford that deals with this, and you submit to them, and if they take your case, if they take your thing, they'll do it for you for free. So. But you have to meet these criteria.
There's also a thing called the Center for Social Documentary at an American university in Washington, run by a professor named Pat Ofterheide. And she's written some very clearly written, sort of easy to understand guides to fair use.
Back to this side of the room.
Hey, Yoruba. Hey, Yoruba.
Hi, Caress.
I just want to say first, just thank you all for telling these stories. I mean, your work is imperative in the validation of Black life in our white patriarchal system. So I really appreciate you all for that. But I'm a student here at Columbia. This is for Aishah. I'm a student here at Columbia, and we have a real problem with acknowledging sexual assault here on this campus. Pretty much, I'm guessing you're using this as an educational tool to spread information, and so I'm very much someone who takes information like this and pays it forward. So what's your take-home message? What can I take from it, to spread awareness on this? You bring up the issue of it and you talk about it, but what was towards the end, since I haven't seen it, was there any strategizing on how to overcome this and things that I can do, to push the movement forward?
Yeah, and let me just say, since you're a student here at Columbia, that No is here at Columbia. So in terms of in library, it's in IRAAS, and it's in the library. And for me, yes, we talk the last quarter of the film really talks about community accountability. So and it really there are several points in terms of really interrogating if the criminal justice system, which I don't think it is stopping rape first and foremost. Doesn't mean that people shouldn't be held accountable, but it's just kind of like prison is not stopping rape. It's also in terms of challenging clergy in terms of when we hear stories, or when I'm not clergy, when clergy hears stories about sexual violence, of really addressing it from the pulpit and not, sweeping it under, to the side. I think that in terms of colleges and universities, which is where I do a lot of speaking, there's several things that, I'm very excited about the activism that is being documented here at Columbia and moved by my sister survivor, who I do not know, in terms of walking around with that mattress. I just think that is powerful. So let me just, my God. And I think that it's what I really, one of the reasons I wanted to made known is because the face of victim survivors, because some people have not made it to the survivor stage, is not that of Black women, is not that of Latinas, is not that of Arab women, unless they're talking about what's happening in the Arab world, those poor women, right, as if like what's happening here, that's a whole colonialist conversation. And so I think it was just to really kind of say that this is what's happening, and I'm noticing this in terms of the national kind of anti-rape movement that's happening on college campuses. I get very concerned because, particularly when we're talking about in this age of so much heightened awareness about white supremacist violence against all Black bodies, that what happens if we don't have some kind of analysis about sexual violence, right, and then the prison industrial complex, right? Because I know if I saw, I see these, if I was at, who would want to call the police if you're a person of color, right, in terms of being sexually assaulted, for your own safety, about, you may want the rapist to stop, but you don't want him or her, because it happens in all communities, to be brutalized by the state. And so I think that what the take-home message is that how do we begin to have these conversations in our various communities, however they're defined. This past Monday I was at Duke, and where Mark teaches, and the Alphas and the Sigmas were co-sponsors of the screening, and that meant a whole different type of audience. That we had a circle dialogue of quite a few young Black, everybody was young, Black men in the room, but the fact that they were sponsoring it, I think, put a message out on campuses saying, we are going to take on this issue. So I think that these are the things that have to happen, because I'm happy to see, the faces of white male anti-rape activists and men particularly, but there are a lot of men of color who are doing this work, not as much as it could be, but there are a lot, and we don't see their faces as often. So I think it's like, how do we do that coalition building, including speaking to those communities that we may not want to speak to for whatever reasons, but kind of figuring out how do we bridge these gaps. And while Sexual Assault Awareness Month is important, Domestic Violence Awareness Month is important, let's have these events in February, Black History Month. Let's have these events and during months or June, or all these kinds of things where we may not think of it in that way, because sexual violence doesn't just happen in April and October.
And at least when we talk about campus culture, the time to do that work's actually in the beginning.
Oh yeah, particularly with that income, and they don't,
most incoming
exactly.
young women get raped in the first 2 weeks of their semester.
Exactly.
I'm gonna go over here to this gentleman, and then we'll head back to this part of the room.
Right,
second row.
Hi, I just want to thank you all for doing this incredible work with film and media. But my question is for Yoruba. I'm particularly interested in what you said earlier about capturing both sides in your film. And in thinking about the content matter of Pier Kids and Friends of Essex, it seems that more young Black and brown queer youth are more focused on survival than marriage. So I'm really interested in why you didn't capture that side of the narrative and analyses, because it was touched on very briefly at the table as soon as the guy brought it up, and the lady talked about the Montgomery bus boycotts, but I was really interested in why that side of the narrative wasn't captured, because this film seemed to be situated a lot around Black heterosexual folks and queer folks.
What did you say at the end?
It seems that a lot of the film is situated around Black heterosexual folks and queer folks.
more black hetero. No, that's not true. I think if you watch the whole film, that it's
I've seen the whole film, but I was just really interested in why that analysis
of marriage.
Yeah.
But okay, well, we can talk more after. But so the reason why I chose that to look at that story, the marriage equality story, is because I started this film because of what was happening in 2008 around Proposition 8 in California when Barack Obama was elected president and Proposition 8 was passed in California, which banned marriage equality. And African Americans were immediately blamed for this, for coming out for Barack Obama, and that, because we came out and we're so homophobic and we don't care about anybody else's civil rights, we want to take away gay people's rights. That was the inspiration for me to make this film. And I wanted to look at why as I said before, why blacks and gays were being pitted against each other, and black LGBT voices were not part of the conversation. So the fact that you feel like it was centered on heterosexual things, I'd like to talk with you about that afterwards. But and really for the what I think started happening politically is that the marriage equality issue became the thing that people were inspired by. And for me, following activists like Caress and the other activists that we see, this became, in some ways, a metaphor for acceptance in our community. And that's what I tried to show in the film, that it wasn't just about marriage. Yes, there are these 1,000 rights, as she says, but this is about how we are. And that's why, we have scenes of them, of the characters dealing with this in their personal lives, coming out to their family, and it became about acceptance. And quite honestly, when I first started this film, I too was like, why all this focus on marriage? There are other things that are, more important. I think you can still make that argument. But it became, and I think that there is something to be said about how you inspire, how a movement is inspired. So if it is the Montgomery bus boycott, if it is about being able to be at a bar in '68 in Stonewall, that's what inspires the movement. And of course there are other bigger issues. And this is the story that I chose to tell. I mean, I think it goes to show we need, there are, as we said, there are many stories in our community that need to be told, and this is just one of them.
May I add something there? So I think sort of for myself, when I was watching film back, and something that you said that I definitely wanted to chat about more, is sort of the idea of people being inspired around the marriage equality movement and the sort of marriage equality narrative, right? So I'm thinking about that, but then I also am thinking about when I saw Wilhemena's War. And I'm thinking about these black women in North Carolina who don't have access to hospitals, healthcare, and things of that nature. So I was a little, I don't know the right word, but I definitely feel that Jamal, if you can tell me if I'm incorrect, right? So the idea of the marriage equality movement you're saying is a heteronormative concept, right? And it's a heteronormative construct, right? And I think that we as queer people sort of have to distance ourselves from what those things mean, because when I'm looking at Wilhemena's War, it doesn't matter if she can get married or not. She doesn't even have access to like a damn hospital, right? So my thing is like, how are we sort of doing the work instead of saying like, oh, this is like this lily white thing and I feel nice that I can get married, but like I cannot get to a hospital.
Well, the thing is, I just have to take this on a little bit, because I don't think it has to be either or. Like, of course we're working for healthcare for all people. Of course we're working around homelessness in our community and economic security. But part of it is the fact that if my partner, I'm in a state where I can get married, if my partner can't get health care because we are not, and yes, there is a problem that is the way you have to access health care in this country. But we, and I fully admit that. But there are rights that we are denied by not being able to, get married on a federal level, So I don't want to minimize that. I don't think it should be minimized. No. And I don't think it should be that it's pitted against each other. It's like we either are fighting for, for health care or marriage equality. I mean, if we want to shake the system and bring down, we have to be on all these fronts.
No, and I think that's the point that you just made is important. It's not that folks are invested in marriage equality, right? We're invested in how do we derive access to resources from a system that will only allow us to do it under certain kinds of contexts. Right, so when we're dealing with the amendment in North Carolina that eventually passes, right, but now the Supreme Court said can't. When I'm talking to cats in the barbershop about this, I'm like, the language that you think of is that this is about same-sex marriage, but if you are a dude and you living with this woman and you'd like to get resources from this woman because you ain't working, right, this law is not going to allow you to get resources from her either, right? And that's when dude was like, oh. This ain't really about gay. No, it ain't. It's about resources, right? And marriage equality allows you to access some of these resources, right? And they're life-saving. The kids need braces. Kids get sick. They got to go. And I understand the point that was made by the young man about the idea that young folks are dealing with different things. But young folks aren't thinking about health care either. I mean, folks think about different things when they get at different stages of their life. And so folks have to organize around what is ever moving them at the time and then create art that reflects that.
And just real quick, as far as Pier Kids is concerned, I was on Christopher Street when marriage equality passed, when DOMA got struck down. And yes, it's true. Most of the people who were in front of Stonewall were white, middle class, or some attempt at looking like that. But you would be surprised I was surprised rather with how many of the young people that I call peer kids were psyched, how it gave them a boon. It made them feel as though they mattered more in the world. And mind you, my politics on marriage at the time, I couldn't even commit to the word commitment, let alone actually doing it. Spelling the word would have been difficult back then. But so when these kids who we're looking at a film periods and we're like, oh, well, these kids don't have anything. Why would they care about marriage? They have so many more important things to think about. One of the reasons why they're so easily victimized in so many different directions is because this idea of being worthless, being just totally, your humanity is not valued in any meaningful way. You are as good as your last date. You're as good as the weave in your head. You're as good as the shoes on your feet. And gay marriage gave them a sense of value that kind of transcended the material stuff. This idea of being a citizen in a democratic society, you can't totally overlook that. There's value to that. Now, I hear what you're saying. Obviously, I hear what you're saying. But at the same time, gay marriage is not just. I was surprised. It gave me a lot of joy and a lot of hope to watch these kids take that as their victory too. Yeah, and as making this film, as I said, I completely had a critique of marriage equality, of the movement of it being a white, male, gay-dominated, Yes. And I came by seeing what people were doing in our community. I was inspired, and I, got on board myself.
And don't forget, we're coming out of a tradition where folks could not do it and had to jump over a broom, right? I mean, there is a larger kind of history around this narrative. Dr. Green.
Hello.
I hope I explained it.
So, actually, first of all, thank you. It is wonderful to see Black folks making films, sharing films, being in the room together, exchanging, and just as a filmmaker, as a scholar, it is lovely, and I feel so much gratitude for all of you. I have a couple questions for each. Well, not for each person, but for it's gonna be fast. So for Aishah, I really want you to talk really about the importance of poetics in making black queer film and sort of the history of that. And then for Amir, sort of along those same lines, because you engage a similar kind of, what I would say is like a black queer film aesthetic that you take from like Marlon Riggs and all of these folks, right? And so from these black queer filmmakers, artists, a lot of them were also black feminists. So when you're engaging in this work, how does the black feminism come up in your piece? And the last question, which is also for Yoruba, because it was similar to that, but a little bit different, and that's the question going back to the title of the film, The New Black, right? So how do you sort of contend with your film? I've seen it a couple of times, and it's going to have wide circulation. It is an amazing film, and I'm so happy that you made it. But how do you contend with the fact that the new black might become represented in a sort of classed way, right? So it is sort of about class, right? So marriage is, people of a particular class are interested and invested in marriage. And so how do you, when you're circulating the film, how do you make sure that people know that this is not the new black? It is not the only new black, because there are all of these different types of blacks, which is why I love this, because we got to see so many different representations together. So if y'all could travel together at all times, we could do like a concert series. That would be fantastic.
Make money from this.
It'd be like the Wu-Tang Clan.
Okay, so
I'm sure we got a few Ivies represented in the room, so we got to make that happen.
yeah, and again, props to Yosef and Laura for curating this and my sister Jennifer S. Leith. Okay, so in response to your question, thank you, because I'm hardcore, non-negotiable black feminist, lesbian, and grew up, my mother, who's in the film, Gwendolyn Zahara Simmons, is a black feminist. So there was never, ever in my life, and I'm 45, a dichotomy, like race, gender, never. So when you grow up with somebody who said that they are a black feminist, then they're like, oh, okay, I want to be one. And then my father, who's also in the film, they're divorced, Michael Simmons, has always supported black feminist principles. So I think so I talked about Tony, and definitely Tony, but let's just start, with mom and dad and Nana, and all that. So in terms of that, and my work is for Julie Dash, who's not a lesbian, but I was heavily influenced by Daughters of the Dust, Marlon Riggs, Michelle Parkerson, Zenabu Davis. These are filmmakers, Yvonne Welbin. These are and Yvonne and I are close in age, so she's not in that same, but she definitely her work precedes me, where I felt like, oh, I want to do this, and seeing, just seeing their work and being influenced by that. But in terms of like shooting Essex and then there's Anna Ray, who's in the film, and then Samia Bashir, who's earlier in the film. Like so much of how that was shot by Joan Brannon was very much influenced by Marlon Riggs. Tongues Untied, which I show every semester in my Gay and Lesbian Lives class, is just it's brilliant. And just how, you use spoken word as soundtrack. And the other thing that, and this is Tony's influence, I did not want a narrator. Nothing's wrong with narration. But for me, I was like, because Tony's always talked about the omnipotent narrator, and I didn't want to do that. And so the story literally goes from enslavement through present day. And so everybody, there is no one who is kind of guiding that story. And that was very, very important to me. And to let poetry and dance, because there's some dance segments, to kind of segue, give us some breathing room a little from the testimonies.
So for myself, I grew up, my family's Jamaican, and one of our traditions, which I think is definitely a tradition of African descent, is storytelling, right? It is using words and language and understanding the power of that. But to answer the second part of your question, my mother gave me Audre Lorde, and Audre Lorde taught me the power of words and taught me the power of language as an extension of my upbringing, right? In understanding, I grew up in a home with a strong black woman who was fearless and would wear you out at a drop of a dime, right? And I think it was definitely that, like Aishah said, it started at home for me, and understanding that folks are equal, and that, and even understanding sort of how do we challenge patriarchy and how we challenge masculinity and femininity and what these sorts of things mean. It really just started at home, and it showed up in my work by the people who have really given me the foundation to do this work.
and since we're all giving shout outs to our moms, I also grew up with a mom who is a playwright, and politics were always personal. So it was, for me as a documentary filmmaker, I'm very interested in the national or international political context, and then how that it's affecting people personally. So to your question around the class issue, I think that what the film, what I hope, and when I've gone around, to many screenings, and it really provokes a dialogue, a conversation, and that's a lot of what we're doing with our outreach. For example, right now we just launched an HBCU project where we awarded 4 HBCUs all in the South money to work with the film and have their own dialogue. I haven't been to any of those, but we've been getting pictures and hearing, and it's been amazing. And we're going to do it on a bigger level next year if we get the money to do so. We have a faith initiative program where we are working, hopefully with Yosef, on bringing together people in the clergy and people working in different faith institutions around the country to use the film as a way to create more welcoming churches and welcome. So the film, I always wanted this film to be used for outreach and engagement and activism, and how the film could be used. So it tells one story, but I think that the conversation it can provoke can be on many different levels. And I've had, I've been in screenings where people started talking about racism on campus, and what that means, or talking about being a female, because women are centered in this film as activists and changing their own community, and what that means. So it's the new Black is also the conversation, and I think I said that, the new Black conversation around these issues.
Bunch of things. Give us your websites and your Twitter hashtags and Twitter handles.
Are we taking more questions first?
Yeah, we are, but we're going to...
Amir Dixon. My Twitter is Amir Now, AMIRNOW. Website, NewNationNow, NUNATIONNOW.com. Email amir@newnationnow.com.
Slow down.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Try it one more time. Try it again.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I just want to get the questions. My website is newnationnow.com, NUNATIONNOW. Twitter is Amir Now, AMIRNOW, and email is amir@newnationnow.
My name is Elegance.
Huh? What's that? Good. Amir, AMIR, @newnationnow,
New Nation Now.
NewNationNow, NUNATIONNOW.
And I'm Elegance Bratton. My personal Twitter handle is Langston_Cruz. My film Twitter is @PK The Life, and the website is www.pierkidsthelife.com. If you want to get at me that way. And we're on Facebook too, and we got an Instagram. Got to follow me on the gram. And it's Langston_Cruz on the gram.
Cruz, C-R-U-S-E or C-R-U-I-S-E?
U-I-S, like the shit.
Just trying to figure out which one of those things you were playing with. Right. Okay. If you go to wilhemenaswar.com, Wilhemena, WILHEMINASWAR.com, wilhemenaswar.com, and you'll have links to the Twitter and the Facebook and all of that. And then if you just want to follow me on Twitter, I'm @JuneCross.
My website is knowtherapedocumentary.org.com.net. Know the Rape Documentary. My Twitter handle is AfroLez, AFROLEZ. My email is info@knowtherapedocumentary.org.
My website is newblackfilm.com. We're on Facebook, New Black Film. Twitter handle is #NewBlackFilm. And I actually, for those of you who haven't seen the film, I have a screening this weekend on Saturday at 6 p.m. at the Real Sisters the Real Sisters Film Festival. And if you go to, it's on Long Island College University in Brooklyn, and if you go to the website, you can see the exact information.
So Laura and Joseph are telling me we're done. Thank you for the amazing conversation. Thank you for
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.